In this week's Torah portion, you shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on the Sabbath day. Where did that come from? Why is that an observance?
When you read Vayakhel, does it feel like you just read this material, like very recently? Seems like a lot of repetition.
You shall do no work on the Sabbath day, otherwise you'll be put to death. Well, curses and the death penalty. You can't have both.
Let's jump in, Jono.
Let's do it. G'day, dear viewers, and thank you for your company once again here on truth2u.org. That's truth number 2 letter u.org. I'm Jono, and joining me all the way from the HOREB Institute in Louisiana, of course, is the author of the Moses Scroll, Ross Nichols. G'day, mate.
Hello, Jono. How are you, my friend?
I'm pretty chilled. I'm still recovering. You're still recovering. Getting over our cold. So if we're doing a little bit of this all the way through, you're just going to have to put up with it. It is, of course, time for Season 3 of Torah Pearls, brought to you by Tanakh Tours. Tanakh, TanakhTours.com. Go there, leave a deposit, join us, Ross and myself, on a tour through Egypt, Jordan, and Israel. If you just want to do Egypt and Jordan, you can do that. If you want to do Israel separately, you can do that, because they run back to back. If you want to do both of them, you'll save a $100 combination discount, Ross, and we still have room, believe it or not. We still have room on the bus.
Hard to believe, but I hope they all come. I hope every person who's watching this right now says, I never even heard of this, and they go get their ticket and they join us. It's going to be fun.
Go and get your ticket, because I say there's still room, but there's not a lot. So get your ticket. This week, Ross, we are in Vayakhel, and joining us, of course, is our AI critical scholar Ezra. And Ezra, kick us off with a summary of Vayakhel. Give us some of the controversial highlights, just a perspective from critical scholarship. That'd be great.
Vayakhel is like déjà vu in the Torah. If you've been paying attention, you'll notice that almost everything described here, the tabernacle, its furnishings, the priestly garments, was already laid out in painstaking detail a few chapters back. The difference? Earlier, it was God commanding Moses what to do. Now, it's the Israelites actually getting it done. Moses kicks things off with a reminder about the Sabbath, almost as if to say, before we get too deep into construction, don't forget to rest. Then, Bezalel and Oholiab take center stage as the chief artisans, and the people bring so many materials that Moses literally has to tell them to stop donating. It's a rare biblical moment where enthusiasm exceeds necessity. From a critical perspective, scholars see this repetition as a sign of multiple sources being woven together, likely the priestly and holiness traditions, emphasizing the tabernacle's importance. Some even argue that the elaborate focus on the tabernacle reflects a later priestly agenda, possibly during or after the Babylonian exile, when the Israelites were trying to reimagine sacred space without a temple. And then there's the golden calf incident lingering in the background. The same people who just committed idolatry are now building the very space where God's presence will dwell. It's almost a form of atonement, channeling that same passion, but this time for divine worship. But is this true repentance or just redirection? The text leaves that question open.
Man.
All
hey,
right.
that gave me something, just that last part, Jono, and I don't know where you want to go with this, but that last little bit was it piqued my interest, because it's like the very people who just committed this idolatry are now building this holy space. And we've even commented that it feels like there's a connection with some of that, pagan elements, or not necessarily pagan elements, but idolatrous elements, the don't make anything in the heaven above the earth beneath us, and then we're going to put those in the space. So anyway, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. And of course, I agree with Ezra. I think clearly, and I think the text indicates this, and we've already touched on it, there are elements, mentions of certain things that clearly indicate that this is a system already in existence, and they're trying to give it a kosher stamp. They're trying to retroject this into the Mosaic narrative to give it Mosaic authority and divine authority.
Yeah,
and which is difficult for people to hear, especially if they come from a fundamentalist perspective, a fundamentalist, and we're going to talk, I think, a little bit about that later in this program. But the way that Ezra kicks off is by saying that Vayakhel is like deja vu in the Torah, and it is. And when I first started reading this, I thought, "Oh, look, this is a perfect doublet." But actually, it's not. What we have before is it is written into the text that God explains to Moses, "Hey, look, I've got these 10 commandments. I've got these ones, and also I've got these different ones that I'm going to put on the second tablets because the first ones that I made."
No, you're going to put them on the second tablets, or
you're
maybe
put it,
I will.
Well,
but
I wrote with my finger of God. I wrote the first 10 commandments. Then you took them down, and you saw everyone with the golden calf and Aaron doing his thing, and you smashed them, which is fine. But now you bring up the new tablets, and in 34:28, it says that.
Moses, God tells Moses to write them.
Yeah, you write these ones because I went to the trouble with my finger in rock. It's not fun. How about you do it this time? But those 10 commandments are entirely different. So it's a different set of 10. We've already talked about the fact that, and this is worth, I think, reiterating, Ross, is that a lot of people think that Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 is the beginning of the book. In the beginning, this is the way it starts, and this is how the faith develops. There's right. Adam and Eve and all this sort of stuff happens, but it's not the fact of the matter. The fact of the matter is that it is the Mount HOREB revelation. It is the imparting of the 10 words, the 10 commandments at HOREB, or at Sinai in this case. Well, it goes back and forth, doesn't it?
Right.
In Exodus.
Depends on which source you're reading. But it is the day of the assembly. That's where it goes back to. It's the day of the assembly. That's the beginning. Yeah.
Quite right. And that is the beginning of the narrative. When they receive the 10 words, when they hear it audibly from God, an overpowering event, a memorable event, that's where it all starts. And the difficulty with that is that we are told that this divine national revelation, this revelation narrative on which the entire Bible is based, not just the Torah, but the entirety of the Tanakh, and even the New Testament exists because of this. Even the Book of Mormon exists because of this. You could even go as well. I mean, you could go on and on.
Well, that's why I call what I do HOREB Institute, because that's the foundation of everything. It's HOREB. It goes back to HOREB.
Absolutely, it's the foundation for everything. That's right. Yeah. And even so, as important as it is, the Exodus chapter 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5 have significant differences. And you have a PDF that people can see on your academia page, which I think is brilliant. If you really want to have a look at that, dear viewers, go to where do they go? Ross K. Nichols at Academia.
It's the link is in the description. We'll just make it easy for them. They can just click the link. Yeah,
there it is. And yet, Ross, chapter 34 has an entirely different, with some overlap, but a significantly different, for the most part, set of 10 commandments there. And then eventually, in the not too distant future, because we're almost finished Exodus, we're going to get to Leviticus chapter 19, and there's another attempt at the 10 commandments there as well. Yeah. And it makes it difficult, doesn't it? And then if people really want to know what was said, they may go to the Dead Sea Scrolls or other ancient sources and say, well, what do these other ancient sources that claim to retain the 10 words, what did they have?
What about some of these translations? What about the Septuagint? What about the Samaritan Pentateuch? I mean, people can go to any one of these places,
And they'll find, when they go to these ones, that there's significant differences between these ones as well. So it's a little bit of an uphill battle for some to wrap their head around, because it's more difficult than it needs to be, and yet at the same time it can be very simple. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but in what we have here is, like Ezra said, déjà vu. Sorry, I went down a rabbit hole there, but we have Moses receiving those 10 words from God, with whatever those 10 words were, and then we have God saying, "Hey, now listen, I've got this. Let me roll it out for you. Come over here on the table, and I'll show you the blueprints that I've got. I want the tent like this, and I want the ark like this,
just like this, just like this, just like I showed you in the mountain,
just like I showed it to you, because I showed it to you. Either he had prototypes and said, no, you can't have these ones, or he had blueprints and he went over them with Moses, but it was very, very detailed. And then Moses comes down and he says, this is the specific detail that I've been given, and I don't have to stress about it too much, because as it happens, Ross, God has put his spirit and his wisdom and knowledge into
Bezalel and
Aholiab. Thank goodness for that. Not only that, but they're overflowing with wisdom by which they even teach others to produce these things. So they have the special knowledge, as does Moses, to produce all of these things. However, now, back then, Moses is being told, this is what you have to do. At the end of being told, this is what you have to do, then we talked about this, I think it was last week, it says, however, or nevertheless, or notwithstanding, or surely, or verily, you shall keep my Shabbat. And from that, as you pointed out, there are 39 verbs prior to that in relation to the work that goes into producing the tabernacle. Therefore, if you are keeping my Shabbat, you shall not do any of those things that they did to work towards producing the temple.
That's right.
That word ach is used as conversely. You shall not, in contrast, you shall not do those things on Shabbat. And then we arrive here, Ross, in this Torah portion, and what happens is Moses comes down with the new 10 commandments that he chiseled into the stone, different to the original ones that he was given, and he says, all right, now gather around, everyone. This is what I want you to do, or this is what God commands you to do. First of all, here's what appears to be the fourth commandment in the original hearing, the divinely imparted voice of God, at the original 10 words. We're going to start with that one. It was the fourth commandment then, but now just listen.
Or the third, depending on how you break it down.
How you count it, quite right. Or the second, if you've read the Moses scroll, which makes more sense, and we may talk about that. And this is what you got to do. Just before we even begin, just make sure you're going to be keeping Shabbat. And then something happens, Ross, which is really interesting. So let me read this, and we're in 35, chapter 35 of Exodus. Moses then convoked the whole Israelite community and said to them, these are the things that the Lord has commanded you to do. On 6 days, work may be done, but on the seventh day, you shall have a Sabbath of complete rest. Now, initially I thought, my goodness, here we are having a complete rest again. It oscillates back and forth between resting and ceasing, as it says in the Moses scroll. You shall cease. And I thought we could just highlight all of those. I don't think I'm going to do that, but it's worth mentioning, Ross, that Shabbat is, it really emphasizes this, and in each way, each time it's mentioned slightly differently. However, if people want to look that up, that's fine. It's chapter 16 of Exodus. Shabbat first appears, and that's prior to HOREB, or prior to Sinai. That's attributed to P. Then, of course, we have chapter 20, where the 10 commandments, the first time the 10 commandments appears. And that is derived, we would argue, from the Moses scroll for the most part, except that it's in the third person. Then we have chapter 31, where again P mentions the keeping of Shabbat. And then in 35, where we are now, and I do believe this is attributed to P as well. It goes on to say, holy to the Lord, you keep it holy to the Lord, whoever does any work on it, Rosh, shall be put to death. Put to death. We're going to talk about that, I think. You shall kindle... where does it, my question is, where does this come from? Where? You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on the Sabbath day. Now, in everything that has been discussed, and as I mentioned, 4 times up to this point in Exodus, nowhere does it say, by the way, don't be kindling any fire on Shabbat. Nor is it a category of work. It's not included in the 39 prohibitions of Shabbat. Where does this come from? Any idea?
No, go ahead. I'm all ears. I'm typing. I'm looking something up because you brought this up, and I thought, let me see if I can find something. But you go ahead and tell me what you got.
All right, I'll tell you my thoughts on this, and we don't really know, but one may speculate. So let's have a little bit of fun with that. What we do know is that there was a discussion between Karaite and Rabbinite. There were 2 schools, if you like, and maybe they weren't called that back then, but whenever this was written, whether it was during the Babylonian exile or post-Babylonian exile, clearly a discussion as to whether or not one may cook. It might have been derived, Ross, from chapter 16, where it talks
16,
about
yeah. Mm-hmm. I was going to say
whether you can cook or not. I think 16:23.
Mm-hmm.
But the rabbis say no. You can have fire as long as you light that fire prior to Shabbat, and as long as it's allowed to keep burning if you have prepared it to burn so long prior to Shabbat. You can't start a fire once Shabbat is kicked in.
I remember this argument now. I remember this argument. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think, I don't know if you're allowed to feed the fire once it's already burning. I'm not too sure about that. But the fealty to that idea is to eat hot food on Shabbat. You must eat hot food to display your allegiance to Rabbinic Judaism. On the other hand, Ross, the Karaites they take a more stringent approach, and they say, no, you're not allowed to have fire, which is akin to saying, in my opinion, and believe me, I'm very Karaite. I really am a fan of the Karaites, right. For many, many reasons. And yet, this is their position, and to me, it's like saying, you cannot live anywhere cold. You just can't. God forbids you to live anywhere cold, because if you live somewhere where it snows, heavy snow in the winter, say up near Mount Hermon, you're not going to be able to heat yourself with fire. And let's not forget that electricity is a recent invention. Mm-hmm. How will one keep oneself warm, Ross, if you cannot? And we're talking about months and months of snow.
And the Karaites, by the way, just in case people aren't clear, you've kind of touched on it, but the Karaites' position is that you can't even use the fire that was previously kindled. Is that right?
Yeah, you got to put it out. Can't have any fire on Shabbat. No candles, no fire, no nothing. And this, somehow, we are to understand, pleases God. This is something where he looks down at you freezing in the snow. If you happen to live in a cold environment, like Dave and Patty, where considerable snow comes down where they are, and he ticks that box and goes, "You've done well, little Jimmy. You shall not die for working on Shabbat." So there's that. I think that's unreasonable, and yet, to be fair, they have good reason for distilling that from the text as we have it in the canonical text. Any thoughts?
Well, I'm glad I live in Louisiana. We don't even, we get very little cold weather.
Snow, which was unusual recently.
That was absolutely rare. But but at the same time, I can see the point. I see the argument in the text. Even arguments that I don't agree with either side, I can see how certain points could be argued in favor of one view versus the other. But the bottom line is you have to think that this is, like you said it to begin with, is God saying, just, if I were you, I wouldn't live anywhere cold because, you can't kindle a fire? I think that I'm glad I live in a warm place. That's all I'm saying. Because here's the deal, especially given our view of the Moses Scroll and so forth, and trying to understand what was the original idea. What is it that God really wants from us in terms of the Decalogue faith and so forth? If that Decalogue faith says don't work on Shabbat, okay. That's fair enough. I get it. And I can get benefit from that. People around me, everything, everybody, animals and so forth. But if I'm not to kindle a fire, how does that do any good for anyone? Yeah, so I'm glad my 10 don't have that. I guess
that's right. I'm glad my 10 doesn't have that. And it is, again, just worth, and the reason why I'm highlighting it here is because we have not seen it up until this point. God has not relayed this to Moses. There's no mention of this prior to anywhere. It just seems to come out of thin air. And the writer, and again, I think we're dealing with the priestly source, just feels that he needs to inject it right here. And I'm suggesting it's probably politically motivated. It's probably an already existing argument. He's on this particular side, so he throws it into the mix. And from a fundamentalist perspective, if you believe that the canonical text is, fell out of the clouds from God, then and I say that in jest, but if you believe that it is divinely inspired and so on and so forth, you don't ask questions. You just go, okay, well, I guess we don't have fire now. How exactly do we interpret that? And that's the discussion here. So,
but one more point. Like even when we're on the Tanakh tour, we have people who come with us, and they know that we're going to help them in their beliefs, whatever it is. So we have certain people who say, "No, I have to have hot food on Shabbat, but I can't do this, I can't do that," and we make all those arrangements. So we're used to dealing with these types of discussions, and we'll help people with that. It just hit me because I remember I wasn't as familiar until we started the Tanakh tour. Some of the requirements for that hot meal on Shabbat and what you have to do to get that. So anyway,
that's right, and that's why when we're in Israel, it's a little bit more difficult when you're in Egypt or Jordan. But when we're in Israel, we stay at kosher certified hotels,
right?
And we allow people to cater to that. So that's true. But this is just a new piece of information without any sort of background. That's worth mentioning here.
Gotcha.
Now, everything after this, so Moses comes down and he says, just make sure you observe Shabbat. Also, by the way, no fire, argue among yourselves, and this is what you shall do. And what we have here is a repetition of what they are about to do, as opposed to what God was telling Moses they are to do. So, in a sense, and as Ezra indicated, we've already done this Torah portion. In a way,
we've covered it.
We've already covered it, really, and to go over this again would be very repetitive, and I don't think that we need to do that. What I would like to do,
all right,
is perhaps take the opportunity to answer some questions, and let me put it to the viewers now, because I have a feeling that next week's program is going to be a little bit. What is that, Pekudei? And that is the last Torah portion of Exodus. It's going to be a little bit the same. So if you have questions that you would like, that you're curious about how we might answer them, we would love for you to put it in the comments section of this program, and perhaps we'll field those and see and add it to next week's program and put a bit of that in, Ross.
Yeah, and I would say if they do it early, I mean, we're also happy to ask Ezra some of their questions too. I've got I've received a couple of notes over the past few weeks where people are either critical of our AI co-host and or they have questions specific, that they might want to hear Ezra's take on it. So anyway, it'd be worth it if they get them to us early. We'll be prepared to throw those in the mix and discuss it with our co-host.
Yeah, do it. All right, so leave it in the comments section. We would love to have a look at any comments or questions, and we may address those next week. Now, before we do jump off this Torah portion, though, Ross, there is something that we have discussed before, but I think it is fair that we just touch on it again before we move into the Q&A. And that is something that I've already just read, but it is verse 2. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. And what we have is a reminder of the difference between curses and the death penalty, because you can't have both.
You can, but it basically makes the curse moot.
It's curse singular.
I mean, it's ineffective. it's ineffective. That's right. It's like you're cursed, and by the way, you're going to be killed.
You're dead.
You're like, well, I'm not really worried about the curse then. I mean, how bad could it be?
Yeah, you're cursed for the next hour, and then we're going to stone you to death.
While we get the rocks.
Well, we just got to go to get the rocks. Yeah, that's it. So, just to remind everybody that the perspective that we're doing this Torah Pearl series is through the lens of critical scholarship, documentary hypothesis, and so forth, but also. I should say not but also, but and also, because they really do shake hands. They go together very, very well. And that is the Moses scroll, or the Shapira scroll, or the valediction of Moses, as Yudan Dershowitz puts it. And what we find is that there's a lot of agreeance between this theory of various sources, and what we believe to be the original document that Moses wrote, that being the Moses Scroll, an authentic proto-biblical document. And what we have in that proto-biblical document is a set of 10, not 9, but 10 clearly delineated commandments, and each of those commandments correspond to a blessing and to a curse. What we always point out is that the blessings are missing from the book of Deuteronomy. In fact, they're missing from the entire Torah.
And by the way, I have a document on my academia page that explains that. In fact, I might put that specific document in the description. So
in the description as well. Yeah. But the best way to explain that, because everyone wants to go, oh, no, you've definitely got the blessings there, you have to read it. Yeah. The best way to explain it is that the blessed bees, the corresponding blessed bees, because we have the cursed be the man who da-da-da-da-da, the blessed bees are not there. The consequences of the blessings. We tried that. People still don't go. Okay. But you're right. That's what led us to work together on that document. And then, I just posted it because we said, no, the blessed bees, and they thought, oh no, here they are in 28. My goodness, you just read the next chapter, Ross. You just didn't see. They're in the next chapter. And I'm thinking, oh, I've never read chapter 28 of Deuteronomy, or I would have seen it. Anyway, so as a document that makes it better. If anyone does that, it's because they what they really are saying, Ross, is we have not read the Moses Scroll. We haven't read the actual Shapira Scroll. Therefore, we don't know what you are trying to say, but we're just going to tell you that it's – so please, people, you have to read both before you protest and say that the blessed bees are there. They're just not there, okay? Yeah. And then what we have is the cursed bees, and again, they correspond precisely to each commandment. So there's 10 commandments, if you like, or 10 words, Devarim, and then there is 10 blessings, and then 10 curses. And the curses are specific. And what is the curse for? I think the curse for this one is, if I remember correctly, cursed be the man who works, profaning the Sabbath. I think I'm just going to go and find it now.
Yeah. So you have blessed is a man who sanctifies the seventh day and ceases thereon.
Ceases.
And then cursed is the man who does work on the seventh day to profane it.
And all the people, they will respond and say, Amen. So there is a list of 10 curses, and they, as I say, they pertain specifically to each commandment. What we have here, and we've slowly been introduced to this concept as we move forward into the Torah, and we're going to see a lot more of it, is a death penalty. It's like if you break these commandments, some of these are going to incur the death penalty. And the question then becomes, well, which is it? Because is it the curses or is it and you still have curses, by the way, in Deuteronomy. Yeah. They're a little bit different to what we see in the Moses Scroll, but you do still have a list of curses. And the question has to be, my goodness, which one is it? Are you going to be cursed? Divinely imparted curses, by the way, divinely governed curses. Or are you going to be put to death? And I think what we're seeing with the death penalty is law that has developed perhaps over centuries and refined over centuries. And we certainly see this in the law code of Josiah's law code in Deuteronomy chapters 12 to 26. It's a refining of civil law, if you like. And that is being, again, retrojected into the Mosaic narrative to give it a kosher stamp, so to speak. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think definitely you're seeing some, how do you say, enhancements or refinement of these law codes, and we see several different examples of the law codes. Deuteronomy 12 through 26 certainly is that, but I tend to agree with you. I think that whenever we see curse and or death penalty, I always used to think, I just never would have said it until the last few years, but I used to always think, what is the purpose of how much weight does the curse really have if the death penalty is moments away? In
fact, why even mention such curses if if the death penalty is divinely imparted, because surely the death penalty carries with it much more weight.
Yeah.
You know, instead of having the curses, dead shall be the man who works on Shabbat. Or any of these things.
And like you said, it's interesting too that the death penalty is not brought about by divine measure, but it's imparted through humans doing the killing. Now there are certain texts which seem to suggest that, like we talked about last week, where God will cut that person off. And it does appear that in those cases, it does appear some measure of God's intervention in the death of the person who commits the offense. But we don't ever have an example where, well, I'm not going to say we don't ever. I had to think about that. I can't think off the top of my head of one where someone violates a command and is put to death by heaven.
I can. I'll give you one.
Okay, I'm ready.
The Korah, the rebellion of Korah, will be there eventually, but it seems like they.
Well, now, just to make a correction, even though they were killed, was it because I know that they usurped maybe some position that's not theirs, but was there a crime that they committed? And then I'll be quiet and let you tell me. A crime that they committed against Torah that then God executed them for?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's insinuated in the text. I'm not sure that it's explicit, but the discussion is that they set up a competition, if you like, a competition tent. But we'll be there eventually.
Okay. All right.
But that would be. I wonder if that would fall into. Maybe not idolatry. We'll talk about that in more detail when we get there. But to your point, it may not be specific to the breaking of one of the 10. So yeah.
But just to make the point, I hear what you're saying about there being, is it death or curse, and then quite often,
kind of both.
It just doesn't make sense, or it doesn't seem to make sense to me at least.
No.
Yeah.
But it does make sense, of course, when you view it through the light of documentary hypothesis that this is something that is written much, much, much later and then retrojected into the Mosaic text. So that's where we are. Now, that's a significant difference. There's a couple of significant differences there, a couple of things that are worth highlighting. And then we get into Bezalel and HOREB, and we then have, again, the questions that we've already dealt with of which ark, because in the Moses Scroll, which is again echoed in Deuteronomy, which derives most of its or much of its text from the Moses Scroll. Moses says, the tablets are in the box that I made. It's a simple wooden chest, as you put it, and yet here we have this incredibly elaborate chapters and chapters dedicated to this ark, and there's a number of things like this, Ross, the priesthood and so on and so forth. And so the question becomes, which of these is correct? Which of these is true? You can't have both. Either it's this or it's that. Which one is it? And so we end up with people asking questions, and we had an excellent question last week from Ronnie. So g'day to Ronnie.
Hey, Ronnie.
Who is an inquisitive gentleman. He and I had many great conversations when I was there. Was it last year, the year before? Last year, and in Louisiana. And Ronnie wrote to me and he said, look, he said, I know that we believe that the Moses Scroll is authentic, but do you think that it's more valid than other Torahs or translations? And I thought that is a great question. And I want to go into some detail in answering that, and I'd like you to help me do it. And I'm
going to learn. I'm going to kick back. I'm going
to. Okay. Have you got a cup of tea there? Get comfortable in your chair.
No, go ahead. I'm ready.
All right. And what I thought I would do is use an example by which to parallel. And I thought, a perfect example to illustrate this, I think, is and people will go, "What are you talking about?" But I think it's the story of Snow White.
What are you talking about?
And the reason why I'm going to use that as an example, Ross, is because as we speak, the new movie is hitting the cinemas, and I do believe that Disney is not looking forward to this because they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars, I do believe, on producing this new movie, and I think that they began. The concept started perhaps even 9 years ago. It's been a long time in the making. And as it has unfolded with teasers to the public and so on and so forth, people have liked it less and less.
Really?
Yeah. And the reason why they don't like, you know, I mean, people are liking Disney less and less. You know, there's clearly Disney have a woke agenda, and people are, people are, they're just over it. It's done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's done. But they've insisted on it. And people are looking at this new movie and saying, you're just going to give us more of that stuff, and we don't want it. And Disney says, well, what do you mean? And they say, well, look, for example, Snow White is Snow White because she has skin as white as snow. So the 1937 classic tells us she has skin as white as snow, and what you've done is you've taken an actress whose skin is not white as snow, and you've retold the story to say that she is called Snow White. This is one of the differences between the two narratives.
Now I'm learning. Jono, you're filling me in. I should know this. I've got lots of grandkids running around. I just didn't. I missed all this, so I'm ready.
All right. Well, this is it. So this is one of the differences is that she sings a song, I do believe, Rachel Zegler, I think is her name. And in the lyrics of the song, she explains that the reason why she is named Snow White is because she was born in a snowstorm and survived the snowstorm, and that's why the parents called her Snow White. So they've just changed it because you can't, you know, if you're woke, you can't have white. White is bad. You can have a skin that's white. We can't do that. Got to change it. So this is one of the changes. And Zegler said, you know, this is not the Snow White of 1937 that everybody loves. I mean, the reason why they're remaking a movie, Ross, is because everyone does love the 1937 classic. Even, I mean, what child hasn't been shown that cartoon? It's a work of art. And it really was one of the things that just shot Disney into the massive empire that it is today. But Zegler says, you know, talking about her new role, she said, "This is not a Snow White that needs to be saved by a prince. No. This is a I don't need no man Snow White. She overcomes us. She's the one that is the leader. You know, she takes charge, and that's fine. Like all of these things, it would probably be a reasonable movie in and of itself if you're into that sort of thing. But what people are objecting to, Ross, is that they're calling it Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. They're saying we already know what that story is. What are you doing to it? You're mangling it, and not only are you mangling it, but you're mangling it to fit this woke ideology that we're just sick of, and we don't.
So you're
want
saying
it.
Just if you want to make a movie and call it whatever, and create your own movie and leave the 1937 classic alone.
Leave the 1937.
Yeah,
that's right. Because people are invested in that one, Ross. People remember that one. They say this is the one that we're emotionally invested in. We know the songs, we know the storyline. It's romantic. It's beautiful. It's beautifully illustrated.
Yeah.
Everything about it, we know it. Just let it be what it is. Just let it be what it is. And so there are people that are understandably upset by this new imagining of Snow White that departs from the one that they know and love and that they feel invested in. So I guess that's fair. And we're about to see, by the way, as it hits the films, it hits the cinemas, we're going to see it crash and burn. And how badly is it going to crash and burn?
So you're telling me to save my money. I mean, I haven't been to the movie in a long time. Just don't bother, huh?
Don't bother. Another difference is the love interest. It says the new movie introduces a new love interest named Jonathan. He must be a great guy.
I'm sure
rebel,
he is.
A rebel who wants to defy the evil queen's monarchy, because monarchy is bad, replacing the traditional prince, right? Can't have a prince. Have to have a rebel. The seven dwarves, they started by not having dwarves. They were just magical creatures. And then they decided, and then all the dwarfs got, angry and this and that. Now there's some sort of, they're animated creatures. So it'll be interesting to see how that.
But are they short? Are they short? Because
I think they're
people,
short.
Okay, because I was going to say short people kind of like that. So don't take away the short people from the movie. That's part
but
of it.
They're short cartoons, Ross. They didn't even use. They could have used you, but they didn't. They decided to go with the cartoons instead.
I'm saying if it's
speak on behalf of your people, Ross.
If you say that's what I'm speaking up for, but if you said today, Snow White and who would not say Seven Dwarfs, right?
No,
people know.
Yeah, that's
Go
right.
ahead.
So we've got that. We've already talked about the name. And what else is? We still got the mirror. There's now 7 bandits in this new film. So anyway, it departs in a number of ways from the 1937. And my point is that everybody wishes that just leave the 1937 alone. Don't touch it. Now, Ross, I would this is akin to perhaps if we liken the 1937 to, say, the King James Bible, right?
All right.
It's the one that everyone knows and loves.
That's right. I agree with that.
Particularly people your age, my age. When we were kids, we memorized Bible verses from the King James.
Amen, brother.
We're very familiar with it. And Ross, there are people who believe, and they really do, and you know them. I've met them that believe that the King James is the Bible that just fell from the clouds, and now we have it, and this is the inspired word of God. They don't even know that.
If it was, as they say in the South, if it was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me, Jono.
That's right. Yeah. Jesus had a King James Bible. We all know it. And that's not to mock people.
No.
who and there are people that believe that, but it's not to mock them. But they don't know that actually the New Testament is written in Greek, the Old Testament is written in Hebrew. To try and explain that to them would just entirely mess with their heads. But this is the, if you like, the 1937 I would maybe for the sake of this illustration, we call that the King James Bible.
Okay, I'm following you.
And the new movie is the I don't know, one of these new woke
the Living
translations.
Bible. Let's call it the Living Bible or something. Maybe a less literal, more fluid kind of thing. I don't know.
Right. That's right.
Or they actually do have. I'm sorry. One more thing. They actually do have translations now that are seeking to be, in some people's definition, they're turning to be more woke. But some would say no, it's more inclusive. We use gender non-specific pronouns.
Yes.
I even had somebody comment on a video that I did one day, and his point was, why do you use the pronoun he for God? Look, man, I'm not going there. You call God however you want on the pronouns. I'm just sticking to the biblical text. So anyway, I get it. But there are some translations more on the academic side even that do lend themselves to this inclusivity, and so that's what they're trying to do. And it's, anyway.
That's right. So now, having established that, Ross, it may surprise some people to learn that actually the 1937 classic, the Disney animation, which was just so brilliant and beautiful, is not the original Snow White. So in the same way that the King James, oh my word, the original Greek, you have the original Hebrew, and so on and so forth. Well, this 1937 is not the original. Before that, there was a 1912 Broadway play. Did you know that? Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
I did not.
This is the first time it was called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And again, Ross, there are some significant differences between the Disney animated classic of 1937 and the Broadway play of 1912, which was so popular back in its day. And some of those differences are, let me see here. In 1937, the prince is a separate character who rescues Snow White. In the 1912 play, the story is slightly darker version of the Grimm's tale. So remember, this is we'll get to that in a minute, but this is a Grimm brothers tale. In 1937, Disney softened the story, making it more family friendly. So what we have in the Disney animated classic is a sort of a refined presentation to make it family friendly and more palatable and therefore more marketable, and less grim, right?
Okay.
In 1912, the Queen asks the huntsman for Snow White's lungs and liver, not her heart, right?
Mm.
In 1937, the Queen asks the huntsman to bring back Snow White's heart. In 1912, the play, Snow White suggests she runs off into the woods if the huntsman spares her. In 1937, the story is more focused on the princess's journey and the dwarf's adventures. The dwarf's home is clean and tidy in 1912, and Snow White is expected to help with the housework. But in 1937, the dwarf's home is a bit messy, Ross, and Snow White is not expected to help with the housework. 1912, the Queen gives Snow White a lace bodice and ties it so that she can't breathe. That's in 1912. In 1937, gives her a poison apple. And 1912, all 7 dwarfs spoke in this story, unlike Dopey in the Disney version. Dopey doesn't speak. Dopey is mute in 37. Also, I believe that the names, and this is the first time that they were given names, the dwarfs, and they were given different names, entirely different names and different characters. So it's got some significant differences, is my point. So when
in 1937, when it came out, and you may be getting to this, but was there sort of this uproar then about, hey, you changed this 1912 version, or was there just? Yeah.
I don't know. I think that because of the technology by which Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs was presented, I think everyone was so spellbound by it and just thought, this is just great. I mean, the Broadway play, that was all right, but look at this. Look what we can do now on the big screen with the animation and make it move and the color and everything is just spectacular. I don't think there was much complaint. My point is that people might be surprised to learn that the classic that they love is not the original. But it doesn't stop there, Ross, because the 1912 is not the original.
Oh, my goodness. This is blowing my mind.
So listen to this. It is a Brothers Grimm. It is a Grimm Brothers tale. And it was published as with a collection of their works in 1854. And differences between the 1854 and the 1912, this is interesting, include the Queen's fate. The Queen in the original Grimm's tale of 1854 is punished by being forced to dance in iron shoes until she dies.
All right.
Snow White's awakening. Snow White is awakened by the prince, who is wary of the Queen and punishes her at their wedding. So Snow White punishes her. The dwarfs are not given names in the original Grimm story. The huntsman, the Queen asks the huntsman to bring back Snow White's lungs and liver, not the heart, and the huntsman tricks her by bringing her organs of a pig. Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
And she eats them, by the way. The Queen tries to kill Snow White with a lacy bodice and a poisoned comb, in addition to the poisoned apple. So the 1912 plays, so we've talked about that. But there are, again, significant differences. And this comes from the original authors, right? People would be surprised to learn. But Ross,
now wait, is there more? There's more? Okay. All right. Okay.
So
I'm getting into this.
The actual original.
Wait. I just have to say, I love going back through stories to figure out the origin. And so I'm into this because
we're peeling back the layers, Ross.
Yeah.
We're peeling back the layers. And what we end up with, all scholars agree, is that the Grimm brothers first penned this story in 1812. 1812.
Oh, my goodness.
Is when this first appears. And it went through a number of changes until their final version, which appeared in a collection which was published in, it was finished in 1854, and I think it appeared in a collection in 1857. But the original story first appeared prior to these refinements in 1812. So the way it differs from the 1854 completed version of the Grimm brothers, the 1812 version, the evil queen, get this, Snow White's mother. It's Snow White's mother, not the stepmother. And Snow White's mother is jealous of Snow White's beauty and is the driving force behind her actions. Whereas in the 54, the evil queen is Snow White's stepmother. So you've got to change that, make it a little bit softer. The mother dies in childbirth, I think. And methods of murder. In 1912, the queen initially sends the huntsman to kill Snow White and asks for her lungs and her liver to eat. That's in the 1812 rather, believing that these would make her immortal and prove Snow White was truly dead. The huntsman, however, kills a pig instead and gives her the organs. Okay, we got that.
So some of the elements do transfer and show up in later versions of the story. I'm liking this. Okay.
Yeah, a little bit, but there's differences. And here's one. I'll give you one more difference, and that is that in the 1912 version, the prince, after finding Snow White in a glass coffin, right, makes his servants carry it around so that he can gaze upon her beauty. And one of the servants gets tired of carrying it around, opens the coffin and smacks her.
Oh my goodness!
Snow White, causing the poison apple, to fly out of her mouth, and then she wakes up.
Oh,
that's the way that works.
He got fed up. Yeah,
that's just because carrying around this dead woman. Why? Just so you can gaze upon her, and he gets Anyway, so in the 1854, the prince finds Snow White in the glass coffin and kisses her, causing her to wake up. So there's differences like that. Now, that's all I'm going to talk about that. But my point is that the one that everybody loves, really, and the reason why everyone is protesting about this movie is the 1937 classic. But it's not the original. When you go back, you find there's been a number of renditions that are slightly different, a number of versions of the same story with its own differences, but you eventually arrive back at the original. Very little known is the original, and the reason for that is that it doesn't have that refined sugar, if you like. It doesn't have those bells and whistles. It doesn't have the fireworks that the 1937 has. And that's all well and good. Stick with the 1937 if you like, but the difference is, Ross, for this purpose of this illustration and this parallel, is that we have a text. We believe, from a fundamentalist perspective, that the canonical text is divinely imparted to us. We believe this is the one we know and we love. This is the one that we memorize verses of. This is the one that we're familiar with, and these are the ones that we began to observe the commandments thereof. Commandments
it's our
like
1937 Cinderella or Snow White. It's our 1937.
It really is. It really is. And as some of us would perhaps not burn fire on Shabbat because of this that we love so much. Some of us would observe Pesach as best that we could, or maybe Sukkot and build a sukkah outside, and all, because we led to believe by this, that this is what God wants. This is what he wants us to do. To do these things, to wear tzitziot, things like this, please him for whatever reason. And because, we want to do what is right in God's eyes, we dedicate ourselves to the observance of this book, even when it's very, very awkward. We do the best that we can, and sometimes it makes significant life changes. But you are invested. By this stage, you're really emotionally invested in action and deed and word and emotion and so on and so forth. As you continue to study, right, you begin to see discrepancies, and you begin to see anachronisms, and you begin to see that perhaps you made the mistake of reading something about the documentary hypothesis, and you begin to see that there are clearly different sources at work here contributing to the body of this work in the Torah, at least. You see things like Moses speaking in the third person all the time. Oh, well, not all the time. Sometimes in Deuteronomy, in fact, a lot of Deuteronomy is in the first person. And why is that? And the same with God. If God spoke the 10 words to Israel, why are only the first two commandments in the first person? Then it switches. We talked about that into the third person. All of these things, Ross, that just doesn't really comport to archaeology or to the text seems to fight with itself. Let me ask you this.
Your example is actually really good because we have friends that write and they really just want to know. They really want to know the truth. But are you suggesting then that a lot of these people, and this is that they're kind of in love with this 1937 version, and anything else challenging that that's the problem? I mean, is that where you're seeing this?
It is a problem. Well, the problem is that if you continue to peel away the layers, as we just did with Snow White, as I say, you eventually arrive at an original document, an original story that doesn't have all the bells and whistles and fireworks of the one that you know and you love. And as Ronnie said to me, he said, "Look, if you take a lollipop from someone, you better have another one to give back to them." Because they're used to having that. They want that. They're going to miss it if you take it away. Well, the problem is that the lollipop that is the Moses scroll, though it makes much more sense on so many different levels, though it screams of being an authentic and an original proto-biblical document, the document upon which all of this is based, right? It doesn't have all the fireworks, like this ark, for example, of Bezalel and Holiab. It doesn't have this elaborate tent. It doesn't have all the cherubs. It doesn't have all the magic. All of this stuff is taken away. But the difference is, Ross, that here, it's not just a story of the Grimm's brothers. I mean, who cares about the Brothers Grimm? What we're dealing with here is supposedly divinely imparted word, that the 10 commandments were divinely imparted from God at HOREB to the people of Israel. It comes with divinely governed blessings and curses. And if this formula actually works, we would like to harness it. Why? Because as the document says, that it may go well with you. May go well with you. So if God has divinely imparted to us a system by which 10 words that we can observe that it may go well with us, well, this is something that we want to harness. But it doesn't have all of the feasts. It doesn't have all the temple gold and all of this sort of stuff. It doesn't have this mystical priesthood. It doesn't have the death penalty. There's a lot of things that it just doesn't have. Circumcision and things like this. And people look at them and they go, but I'm emotionally invested in all of that stuff. You know, the name of Jehovah, the name of whatever it might be. I am invested in that. I've spent a lot of time. Well, let me just say, Ross, you and I were extremely invested with over a decade's worth independently of teaching and programs from a fundamentalist perspective. Even before we refined our faith to the Tanakh, I had I don't know, probably hundreds of Christian or New Testament programs as well. There's a whole lot of over a decade's worth of truth to you that I no longer adhere to, positions that I no longer hold, because I am absolutely compelled and convicted that the Moses Scroll is an authentic document, Ross.
Yeah. I'm of, the same. I think that's one of the things that I was going to ask you is when we have people who come into this and they have questions, one of the things that I hear quite often is, I don't know if I can do this again. And that, what I mean by that and what they mean by that is, I was totally invested, sold out as a Christian. I mean, I know, and you know of someone we're talking about who had tattoos on his body for Jesus, a Christian guy. And now this person is a very Orthodox Jewish person, dressing from a
fundamentalist rabbinite, shall we say?
Yeah. But so this person has now taken that radical Christian view and belief system that they had and said, no, I'm done with that. But this is now my new fundamentalism, and they've embraced that totally. And so, but so a lot of these people will say to us who have been radical in each of those camps, basically, and now we're not. They want to know. Well, I don't know what happens if I then take off all of that second stop. Where does that leave me? I think that's one of the major concerns. People want to know the truth in one hand, but in the other hand, they're like, I'm scared to look any further, and I've confided in you. I've received, I've felt pretty badly at times when I know that people have walked away from everything because they just can't handle I can't do another radical change. I think that's what a lot of people think. Like, and they're in 1937 edition, and they go, okay, let me look at the 1912, and they go, well, okay, well, I see. And then you go to 1850 whatever, and they go
1854.
I can't do another one. Yeah,
that's it. And but the thing is that you're not switching from A to B.
Yeah.
You're refining A, really, is what you're doing. People who are fundamentalists, or people who have committed to the Tanakh, they've done that because they are fully convinced that the God of Israel is real, that there is a God of Israel, and to their credit, they want to live a life pleasing to Him.
Yeah,
and that's great. What you are doing, though, and a lot of these people, by the way, came out of Christianity. People who, what is this fly flying around my face?
I don't know, but I wish you'd catch it.
I would like to catch it. People that listen to us for a long time have journeyed with us out of Christianity into a more refined Tanakh-based faith, if you like. And in that process, they develop skills, critical skills, Ross. And it's difficult to just put those down. When you think you've arrived, you put them down for a little while, and then you start to notice things and go, hang on a minute, and then you pick them up again and say, can I use these skills in that? Am I allowed? Am I allowed to do that? And of course, you most certainly are allowed to do that. This fly, I tell you. So those skills that they developed in that process, they're now they cannot help but eventually start to apply them in the Tanakh as well. But some people, you're right, do get apprehensive and just go, oh, look, if this has got holes in it too, I just don't know if I can do it again, and they'll just walk away, because really what they are protesting against is the amount of work and research that has to be done. Yeah. And that's understandable. Like when that happens, I say to people, look, not everyone is a lawyer, not everyone is a doctor, not everyone is a mechanic, not everyone is a plumber. You don't, we're talking about theology. And if what really turns you on is digging deep into theology and archaeology and the Hebrew text and so on and so forth, well, then this is very exciting, and you and I have found it so. But it's not for everybody. But just know that when you are refining, you're not refining to, say, the Book of Mormon or something like that. What you are refining is represented mostly in parts of the Book of Deuteronomy. It's stuff that you're already familiar with. In fact, the only major differences, Ross, I think, would be that the 10 Commandments in the Moses Scroll is, in fact, 10. And even that's not new, because you'll find it in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 17. And that and the blessings, the blessed bees, are included in the 10 Commandments, and you'll find that they are omitted from the Book of Deuteronomy. Is there anything else that you think is like new material in the Moses Scroll?
No, Not in the sense that people, that's not what they get really hung up on. I think most people get concerned about it is, well, you throw everything else out? What do you that's the way usually people are presenting it. And so that's what concerns them, because things that it's not that it's anything new, because even if they said, well, okay, your 10 commandments have this thing about the don't hate your brother in your heart. I've got that in my Leviticus 19. So, okay, that's not a big deal. What you just described, they go, yeah, that's not the big deal. The big deal is the thing doesn't have chapter 12 through 26. The thing doesn't have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. There's no festivals. There's no blood. There's no killing of. So
no circumcision. There's no priesthood. There's no Messiah. There's no right. So and that's fair. That's so. Then it's not so much that they are venturing into unfamiliar territory, but that everything that is not mentioned in the Tanakh, in the Moses scroll, are we then to view this as added material that's added later by motivated sources, various sources? And the answer, I'm going to just say it, Ross. The answer is yes. That stuff is added. It's not divine. It's not Mosaic. It is added into the Mosaic narrative to give it a kosher stamp. Yes, that is the conclusion that you will eventually arrive at. And so then people have to ask themselves, but hold on. Or it is the conclusion that you arrived at and other people have arrived at. Not everybody's going to arrive at that. Is that fair? You'd have to unpack that a little bit more. It might, yes, the truth is that different people arrive at different conclusions, but really, though, Ross, if one is to accept that if one is persuaded, as I am, that the Moses Scroll is an authentic document and that it is a proto-biblical text, then, as I have mentioned many times before, it is also a full prescription. That is to say, there is nowhere you would put circumcision. There's nowhere you would put a Messiah. There's no function for priests to perform here. There's no need for a temple and sacrifices. There's no death penalties, we just pointed out. There's no reason to not have fire on the Shabbat. There's just, you can't put any of these things anywhere here because it just doesn't fit.
I remember when I first started working on the text, and James Tabor was working on it quite a bit. And this was right about the time you were one of the first ones working on it as well. But I remember James saying, what else, like if you were looking for something else to be in a divine document, what would it be? I mean, what would it really be?
And what would it do? And if it's something we're already familiar with, where would it go? And what would it do in this text? It would stick out like a sore thumb because it would have no function. The reason why is because this particular document is just a full equation. This plus this equals this. There's no need for any additions. There just isn't. But people are, like I say, emotionally invested in certain aspects of the canonical text, like the name, the Tetragrammaton, or the priesthood, or any of these things. And I totally understand that because, again, you and I have over a decade's worth of material where we invested in all of those things and believed those to be true and were proponents of all of this stuff. But now, in light of critical scholarship and the Moses Scroll, I just cannot. It can't be unseen. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It is what it is. And when it comes to this discussion, what I like to use as an example is the Karaites. We've already talked about the Karaites today. The Karaites' view of Hanukkah. They say we're not going to observe Hanukkah. I mean, yes, there was the historical occasion of the Maccabees and this and that, but we will not observe Hanukkah in the sense of lighting the Hanukkah and all of this sort of stuff and proclaiming that we do this because blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who commands us to light the candles and all this sort of stuff, because they say there is no such commandment. There's no commandment of that in the Tanakh. Hanukkah doesn't exist in the Tanakh. Of course, it is post biblical history, and and they say, but the story itself didn't arise until, a couple of hundred years after it supposedly happened. And they say it's just, we're not doing it. We're not going to attribute to God something that we believe is not divinely imparted to us. So they don't do it. Whereas the rabbis, they say, no, this is very important. You must do it. You should do it like this and like that. And God commands us to do that. So there's that sort of a discussion. And I would apply the same if one is so compelled by the Moses Scroll, if you do believe that it is an authentic document and not a fraud, if you do believe that it is a proto-biblical text on which all of this is based, you will see that it is, if you read it carefully and take it in and familiarize yourself with it, that it is a full prescription, and that you couldn't add anything. Even if you wanted to, what would it do? All of these other bits and pieces, you couldn't do it. So you have to come to the conclusion, at least I have, that I will not acknowledge any of this extra stuff as divinely imparted. Won't do it.
So what would you do? What would you say if, so when someone says, why do you guys even do any of this? I mean, why would you do Torah pearls when you're dealing with material that, it may or may not be divinely imparted? Now, I know my answer, I think, but I'm just curious, because we do get that kind of, I think that's one view, particularly from those who might be fundamental in their approach. They might just think, or their inclination or whatever, they might just think, why would you even care? And so I'm interested in your take, and I'll tell you mine. Yeah.
I'll tell you, I would not be surprised, and I don't want to take this away from anyone, but I wouldn't be surprised if I'm the one who is benefiting the most from this series. Out of all of the viewers, I know a lot of people are really getting a lot out of it and are quite enthused. And I may well be wrong. There may be people viewing these programs and just getting an enormous amount out of it. But this is the first time, as you know, that I've dug so deeply into the documentary hypothesis. And I'm really excited about it. And I'll tell you why. Because ordinarily, Ross, if I were to dig into the documentary hypothesis from a fundamentalist perspective, pre 2019, then I would feel uncomfortable, uneasy, somewhat threatened, and annoyed. And you and I even had conversations that were difficult for us to have, that echoed, those sentiments. And so, but now that we have, I feel that I have a safe landing place, and that safe landing place, or the lollipop, if you like, that to use Ronnie's analogy or illustration, is the Moses Scroll. I feel very secure about that, and so what that means is that I can entertain the documentary hypothesis, knowing that I have a safe landing place, which is the Moses Scroll, and both of these seem to, like I say, shake hands. They really do agree with each other so much. And I also wanted to see if there was anything within the documentary hypothesis which might dissuade me from the Moses Scroll. And so far, I have not encountered that yet. So I really am getting a lot out of it. I'm quite excited about it, and I'm quite keen to keep going on this. And this is the reason why we're doing this series of Torah Pills, to answer your question fully. As we've always said from the beginning, to go through the Bible again, to go through the Torah again, through the lens of critical scholarship and the Moses Scroll. And I'm getting a great deal out of it. Your thoughts?
I think that's, you put it excellently. I think when I first was introduced to the material, I didn't jump right in with, let me learn about the documentary hypothesis. Mine was just like yours. We were just studying the Pentateuch and going through, as we did every year, the Torah cycle, the annual Torah cycle of readings. And I began to notice things which led me to then ask more questions and deeper questions. And then later, I actually got into reading a little bit about the documentary hypothesis, critical scholarship, various academic approaches to the Torah. And it was then that it sort of all came together for me that, well, wait a minute, what if some of this is later? And I would see evidence in that. This wasn't like a scholar saying, I didn't know J from E from P from, I didn't know any of that. But a scholar would point out, like you mentioned earlier, Jono, this is third person, or this is anachronistic. This place wasn't called this name for centuries after the time of Moses or whatever. So all of those things sort of came together. And for me, I've always loved the Bible, like you said, from Christianity to some form of quasi-Judaism to B'nai Noah or whatever people might have called me, even if I didn't have a title or a name for myself. It all came together for, I want to know, can we discern that authentic, more ancient underpinning? Can we find the 1858 in this story? What's the earliest strata of the story? And I think that was my original. And so when we look at, if people say, well, I heard that was a forgery, and you're like, well, have you read the book? Have you read Don's book? Have you read my book? Have you even considered, any of this? And I think for me, that's the biggest question is, if you've really considered the case, and a lot of people haven't, they've sort of made their mind up. But again, it's all about when we're looking at, we're going to have plenty of stuff to talk about as we finish up Exodus, and then we go into Leviticus, same kind of thing. And by the way, the Leviticus Torah tablets, ready to order. People can order that.
That's right. So we're Exodus. We're wrapping up Exodus. We're going to do Pekudei next week, and again, I think there's a lot of repetition there. I don't know that we're going to go into a great deal of detail over things that we've already really talked about. But so what would be great, particularly in light of this program, I'm sure people have perhaps they have a lot more questions. So please be sure to leave those questions and comments. If you have a comment under this video, we will glean from that. And perhaps include that in next week's program, because I think we're going to have a little bit of time to do that.
I think that's fun.
But yes, we're coming to an end of the Exodus Torah tablet, and Leviticus is now available for purchase, Ross. Is that right?
It is. That's right. And the link is in the description, so people can go and get that. And,
to the collection. And the reason why they're April?
I was going to say April 5th is the first Shabbat so when we start April, we're going to be into the book of Leviticus on Torah pearls and anything else. If people are joining me on Saturday mornings, we're going to be going through Leviticus there as well.
There you go. So just quickly, Ross, in case people are not familiar, what do you get in a Torah tablet? What are the features of a Torah tablet?
Well, we've used the English. It's sort of in lines with what people might think of in scripture journaling, where people take notes. Well, this is set up more for an academic study, because on the left-hand page is the time-honored text of the ASV. We use that. You and I talked about the King James, but I selected it for several reasons.
Yeah. Well, I had an ASV when I was a kid. I had a King James as well, but I am very familiar with the ASV. I love it. Yeah,
I've always liked the ASV. It does use a form of the divine name, and people get in debates about everything, including the name, especially the name, maybe. But I like it.
But it's better than just Lord. The generic Lord. It has so the ASV has Jehovah, and that's great. I appreciate that, and I love it for the formal translation that it is. Go ahead.
Yeah, and just one other thing is that in the text, we put in each of these Torah tablets not only the annual cycle of reading, where they begin, and you'll see it clearly marked in the text, but also the triennial cycle readings. It's got the breaks in the text according to the Leningrad Codex, like most modern Bibles break for paragraphs, and so put it in a certain format. We followed basically what you see in a Torah scroll. So anyway, it's got all those features. Now we're going to be in Leviticus, so it's P, right? It's going to be as we work through, but you'll be able to clearly see where we're at, and I think it's good for taking notes. You can work through.
It's a Bible you can write in. It's a Bible you can write in. You're expected to write in it. You've given a page where you can write on it and make your notes as you go along. You're given the source. You're given the breaks and all this sort of stuff. The name of God is clearly stated. It's a winner all around. So Leviticus will be it's available now. Is that right?
It is available right now. People can buy it on the website, and the email or the address is in the description.
Don't forget to like and share, and as I mentioned, leave your comments and questions, and we may use those in next week's program. Don't forget, TanakTours.com, T-A-N-A-K-H, TanakTours.com. Still some seats available. We would love for you to come with us in November. This coming November, just place a $500 deposit, and your seat on the bus is secured. Egypt, Jordan, and Israel with Ross and myself. We're going to have some fun. It's going to be an adventure.
That's it for this week's Torah portion. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to leave your comments and questions for Ross, Jono, or even me. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Be sure to tune in next time as we keep digging into the text. See you then.